Hello, and welcome back to Inebriated Warriors Reviews. I am Crow. I am more up there than usual, so bear with me. Today we're going to be going over the Prophecies Begin book 4, Rising Storm. And I just want to reiterate, I didn't remember anything about this book going into it. So this was very surprising for me. There were things I didn't even remember. So I guess let's start out with kind of an overview of what the book talks about. We've got a prologue talking about a sickness, and then we later find out the sickness is happening in Shadow Clan, and it eventually kills Nightstar. It was a little weird in the prologue just because I didn't remember what happened in this book, and also because they didn't give any names or even the name of the clan these cats were part of in the prologue, which I felt was kind of annoying. Like, I would have liked to have some names or the clan information, like just something like that that could have come back later. Cloudpaw, after being an annoyance and basically saying, "Screw you, Fireheart, I can go eat at the Two Legs place if I want to, and I can still be a warrior while I do it," he gets catnapped by the Two Legs, and then Ravenpaw comes to ThunderClan territory, is like, "Fireheart, I found this cat. He seems unhappy about his two-leg life." And lo and behold, they go and rescue Cloudpaw. And he supposedly learns his lesson. I think he probably does, but we don't know that in this book yet. He just says he does. There is a terrible drought that happens, which eventually leads to the fire at the end of the book. Totally forgot about this fire. Ironically, I was thinking about this recently, and I was thinking about, how many fires actually happen in the books, and all I could remember was the one in Power of Three. So I was like, oh, there's a fire because of the drought. And this fire eventually kills Halftail and Patchpelt, two of the elders in ThunderClan, and Yellowfang. And that was awful and terrifying, or not terrifying, terrible. I didn't think she died this early. I was very upset about that, and she said some really sweet things to Fireheart, saying how she couldn't have given birth to him because he was too good. It was very sweet. Because of the fire, and then going back to like Tiger Claw betraying her and things like that, Bluestar completely turns her back on StarClan. Do you want a thing to make comments? Okay, if you want to, it's here. So that's a pretty big deal. Tiger Claw attacks Fireheart in his patrol at one point. He kills Running Wind, and Whitethroat, who is a Shadow Clan warrior that came over to ask help from ThunderClan over the sickness, runs out in the Thunder Path and gets hit by a monster because he sees Tiger Claw. Dark Stripe is kind of just not very trustworthy through most of this book. And specifically at the end, when you realize that Tiger Claw has become the new leader of Shadow Clan, because Nightheart, I'm getting stuck in Starless Clan. Nightstar is killed by the sickness in Shadow Clan, so they have a new leader, and it ends up being Tiger Claw, now Tiger Star. And during this I keep saying Dyke, that's terrible. Dark Stripe, it says that he has a gleam in his eyes. And it's like, I know that Dark Stripe ends up in the Dark Forest. I still didn't put a spoiler warning for this. Oh well.
I think people who watch me have already known what happens in the story.
Who watch you?
No one's watching me.
Okay. Oh, and the other thing is that Bramble, so Golden Flower has her kits, and they are Tiger Claw's kits as well. Tawny Kit and Bramble Kit. And of course, we know Bramble Kit looks just like his father, and so Fireheart is keeping a close eye on him. But one of the important things is that Fireheart chooses to save Bramble Kit in a burning tree rather than go back for Yellowfang, because she runs into the camp trying to save Halftail. And I don't know if he regrets that or not.
I just want to say, I find it disrespectful how many cats are named after their disability.
There's, yeah, half tail, one eye, small ear. We haven't gotten to lost face yet.
It's a considerable amount.
It is a considerable amount. That is true. Crooked star used to be crooked jaw. Yeah, that's a whole thing. This is my partner off camera. What do you want me to call you?
Well, preferably Gage.
Okay. Well, I didn't know if you wanted to go to by an alias or something. So this is Gage, my partner. He's going to be making comments occasionally. As I said, deaths and causes. So Running Wind and White Throat are killed in the aftermath of the whole thing, with Tiger Claw at the border, Night Star from the sickness, and then Halftail, Patch Pellet, and Yellow Fang from smoke inhalation because of the fire that goes through ThunderClan's territory. My favorite part is definitely the friendliness that we see in the clans in this book, which is definitely uncommon compared to the last ones. Now, let's be clear that Wind Clan did try to block Blue, or successfully blocked Blue Star from going to High Stones to converse with Star Clan. And I think that definitely lends a part into Blue Star turning her back to Star Clan. But it was still nice seeing Fireheart talk to Tall Star and One Whisker, River Clan offering Thunder Clan shelter after the fire, things like that. And I also liked that Cloudpaw really seems to mature during this book after being catnapped by the two legs and coming back. He's like, I truly understand now. And time will tell whether or not that actually sticks. But as far as I can remember, Cloudtail turns into a really important warrior. What are my least favorite parts? ThunderClan doesn't tell the other clans about Tiger Claw's treachery, and I think that plays a very large part into Tiger Claw becoming Tiger Star of Shadow Clan. And it feels like, they didn't want to show weakness and stuff like that. And it's like, why didn't you warn these other cats? Like, I don't know if that would have truly stopped Tiger Star from becoming leader of Shadow Clan, but it's still a major plot point. And that was kind of irritating. It felt like something that could be easily avoided.
Shadow Clan is not by nature evil, right?
No. They're kind of like the Slytherin. They get a lot of bad reputation, but in reality, they're not that bad.
Okay.
But it very much, you can basically split up the four clans into the four houses of Harry Potter. Shadow Clan is definitely Slytherin. Thunder Clan is definitely Gryffindor. And I'm pretty sure it was River Clan is Ravenclaw and Wind Clan is Hufflepuff or something like that. Sky Clan doesn't get a part because we all ignore that Sky Clan exists for most of the series. How have the characters developed in the book? You see, because of Blue Star continuously just, her mental state is degrading. She's having a really hard time coping. You see Fireheart taking on a lot more of the leader duties, just beyond what he's expected to have as a deputy. And White Storm is helping him through this, being a mentor for him, because everybody knows, like, White Storm very well could have been the deputy instead of Fireheart. He probably was the more obvious choice anyways. Obviously, I said Cloudpaw is maturing and that Blue Star turned her back to Star Clan. So those are other ways that the characters have developed, not necessarily in a good way in Blue Star's case, but they have developed in some way. The relationships, we see a lot more of Sandstorm and Fireheart, which I love. I love Sandstorm. It's just really sweet. They've got their moments where they're fighting and stuff like that. And it's just good to see that even despite their differences and the issues that they have, they're still coming together in the end. And I really enjoyed that. You also see a lot of Dustpelt and Fernpaw. We know that they eventually become mates, but it never really occurred to me as weird when I was first reading it, but now a warrior actively getting close to an apprentice is kind of like, but you've got to take some liberties with cats, I guess. I mean, they don't really discriminate between ages and stuff like that.
I was going to ask, like, When time passes in this, because you've talked about like the battles taking place, how much, like, what's the stretch of time these are taking place, and like how are cats keeping track of time?
So the beginning of the series is set in Leaf Bear, the very beginning of Leaf Bear, which is winter. And right now during this book, we are in I believe Greenleaf, which is summer. So we're looking at about 6 months or moons. Um, and that's about it. So we're trekking along. We've got a lot of apprentices right now. A lot of apprentices right now. So it's kind of odd how quickly the time moves in some of these versus others.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other things I wanted to mention is specifically because we know that Fireheart is getting dreams from StarClan pretty regularly, and he's usually talking to Spotted Leaf. But a lot of his dreams in this book revolve around Spotted Leaf walking away and him following her and things like that. And it's a wonder to me because we know that Fireheart had feelings for Spotted Leaf even as an apprentice. And then, of course, she was killed. So I wonder if Spotted Leaf fading away is kind of a signal that he's moving on from her and looking at Sandstorm more. And of course, the changes in leadership and stuff. So Night Star and then Tiger Star. Ashpaw and Fernpaw are introduced. And for some reason, I know I mentioned this in the last video, that Cinderpaw is being referred to as Cinderpelt. I don't know why they did that because it is very clear throughout this book that she is still an apprentice, but she's still called Cinderpelt. They don't talk about anything about her medicine cat ceremony unless it's talking about like her becoming an apprentice at the end of the last book. But she would still be a paw. So I don't know why it moved the way it did. That seems like a weird continuity error compared to the rest of the books, but that's that. There's also a lot of owl analogies throughout this book. This is started in the prologue, and you see it continuously come up throughout the rest of the book. And that was definitely an interesting thing for me, especially because I was able to underline it and be like, okay, here's an owl mentioned again. That's kind of weird. There were a lot of owls mentioned. And the last thing I wanted to mention was because I'm wondering, it's never explicitly said how the fire is started in ThunderClan territory, but I'm wondering if it's related to two-leg activity, because we know from the prior books that the two legs are poisoning the stream or the river that runs between ThunderClan and RiverClan. And Silverstream, when she was alive, specifically said the ThunderClans are poisoning, or ThunderClans, the two legs are poisoning the river. Like the fish don't taste good, there are fewer fish, and things like that. So I'm wondering if the fire could have been the result of a two-leg campfire or something like that, because there is mention of like, there's vague references to like maybe sirens and two legs being in the forest. So that was an interesting point. As well as, I didn't recognize this when I was first reading the series, but they're really setting up the second series for the Great Journey and everything, where their territory is being destroyed in the new prophecy and they have to move away. They're already setting that up as early as the second book in the Prophecies Begin. And I think that's pretty darn cool that they set it up so soon, that it really feels like the new prophecy is very fluidly transitioned from the Prophecies Begin. Other than that, I think that's the end of my rambling. Do you have any questions or thoughts?
Top 3 cats from this book.
From this book?
Yeah.
Yellowfang is number 1, definitely. Top 3. I guess Sandstorm would be number 2. And I don't know. I like Cinderpelt. I didn't like her as much. Same thing with the Yellowfang. I didn't like them as much when I first read this series, but I like Cinderpelt and her relationship specifically to Fireheart and how close they are. I like that even though Fireheart is no longer Cinderpelt's mentor, she's still really close to him. And that's a nice little thing that happens. I liked the relationships that develop throughout this book and how they relate to one another and things like that, and how they develop in later books as well. As far as that goes, that's the end of my ramblings for this time. I hope I was coherent. And I will see you all for The Dangerous Path. Bye.